Good evening, and welcome to California Convictions Unscheduled live stream for Wednesday. I usually do these live streams on Tuesday in the evening, but I was unable to this week because I was traveling, so I wanted to go ahead and do it today. I was primarily going to speak about arriving at High Desert State Prison whenever I was 20 years old, 21 years old. August of 2002, and High Desert was a serious place to be. I mean, I'm not sure that I realized at the time exactly what I was getting myself into. I'd been at San Quentin, and they ran a hard program at San Quentin, but it was a small yard. You have to understand there's only 200 people on the split yard San Quentin Badger section. And of those, a small minority are the same race as you. So you only interact with 20, 30, 40 people at all. In spite of the fact that they're running a hard program and, there's knives and somebody might even die, it doesn't have the feel of a machine, of an institutional life where everything is a serious level 4 yard. By and large, High Desert was okay. People stayed out of each other's business. They were considerate and kind insofar as it went, but nobody was going to be following you around, making sure that you were following all the rules, that you hit the mandatory workout, that you made it to every yard. At San Quentin, they'd really been keeping track. You had to everything. They meant mandatory when they said mandatory chow, mandatory yard, mandatory workout. High Desert was a little bit more laid back. They treated you like an adult. You just had to participate. You had to be part of the gang, basically. You didn't have to check every box every time. I enjoyed some aspects of High Desert compared to San Quentin. San Quentin had been locked down all the time. Hey, what's up, Volks? Hey, what's up, Silly State Girl? At San Quentin, you got your 2 yards. You went out in the afternoon, and you went out in the morning in a given week. 1 yard to be in the afternoon, 1 yard to be in the morning. Maybe Monday and Wednesday, or Thursday and Tuesday, or whatever it was. But those were your 2 times you were leaving the cell and actually really socially interacting with people in a given week. Maybe 3. As a result, your social interactions were very limited. I know nobody goes to prison to make friends, but it's difficult to just be isolated all the time. It is an experience that sticks with you. Just being in a room with no real distractions, no TV, no radio, maybe a book, but not a bunch of them. And just waiting it out. No celly, no yard, trying to adapt to the solitude, the silence, become comfortable with your own thoughts. There was much less of this at High Desert. First, because I had a celly from the first day that I arrived. He was an alright guy. He was a porter, Blanky. We got along well. I don't know that he and I ever would have been friends. We didn't click. But until he got a little bit, difficult, I guess is the word we'll use. We were fine as cellies, and I think that if I hadn't broached the idea of moving out, if I hadn't said to him, hey, Blanky, I think I'm going to move out of the cell, he and I could have gotten along for a long time. But once I suggested that I was going to move out, we didn't get along after that. I think he saw it as a rejection. Which to some degree, moving out of a cell is a rejection of a celly. If you have a celly that you can get along with, you can maintain even a little, why would you move? Because you're gambling on the next guy being better. Maybe he's your friend, maybe everybody says he's a good guy, and you're going to move into the cell with him, and there's going to be this one thing that he does that drives you just insane. So, given the opportunity, you always stay with the cell you have instead of trade up. What is it they say? Better the evil you know than the one you don't. But Blanky and I, we weren't simpatico. I had the feeling that he didn't like me, and it festered little by little. I only lived with him for about 2 months from the time that I arrived at High Desert until I moved in with Scooby. I've talked about Scooby a lot in these live streams, and I'm going to reiterate that guy's been down in prison since before I pled down on a murder case, and he's still in today. It's a three-striker. In California, they passed a law called the Three Strikes Law. 3 strikes and you're out. I remember being, 16 or something whenever they were talking about it, speaking with my father and mother about the reasonable nature of this logic that if you committed 3 serious crimes where you went to prison and then paroled and then went to prison again, that it was reasonable that they say, you know what, that's enough. We're not going to let you out a 4th time. I don't remember that any of us had a strong opinion about it, but I remember thinking that I could understand the stance. I was generally more in favor of the criminal than the criminal justice system. Criminal penalties should be light, would have been the opinion that I had at the time. But career criminals, them getting locked up indefinitely, I can understand the logic. Until I've seen it with my own eyes, I've gotten to experience this. Scooby was a decent guy. He never hurt anybody. He was a non-violent burglar. And I realize there are gradations of decent. I don't mean he was volunteering at his soup kitchen on his weekends and that if it hadn't been for the heroin habit, he would have been a saint. I mean that I talked to him regularly for a long time. And the couple of things he'd done that were messed up, he was ashamed of and regretted. I knew other guys that the things they'd done were messed up, they were proud of. Oh, it was so smart that I thought of that window I could get into that nobody else would think of. He regretted the decisions he'd made with his life. He was a drug addict. And I remember talking to him literally 20 years ago. And him talking about how he just wanted to get out and prove that he wasn't the guy who went to prison. That he'd changed. Here we are 20 years later. I met this guy in 2002. He's still in prison on the same crime, the same non-violent burglary that he got 25 to life for. The guy's name is Brandon Mays, M-A-Y-S. His CDC number is E38383. I'm going to do a GoFundMe trying to get him a lawyer or psychiatrist, whatever it is that would help him get out. Apparently, if you have a psychiatric evaluation done by an outside professional before you go to board, it could seriously help your chances of being released, because many of the professionals that they have doing these evaluations inside of the prison, well, they start from the perspective of it's a bunch of criminals and we might as well just convict them. The board they default to keeping people in prison, and I can understand why. They have a heavy responsibility. Imagine the moral weight on your shoulders to decide if somebody is rehabilitated, to decide if a dangerous felon should be released out to the real world. I don't mean to criticize whenever I say that their default is to keep somebody in prison. That's their job. But knowing Shaggy or Scooby or whatever we're calling him all these years, it's shameful that he's still locked up. It's been 20 years still locked up. Ghost Rider notes that there's a High Desert in Nevada as well, and he's right. I actually ended up serving out some of my parole in Nevada. And whenever I went to a parole office, I saw a guy who, he looked like he'd done real time. Some of the guys in the parole office were obviously, they'd done just a little bit of time, or at least they looked like they had. He looked like he'd done real time. He was sleeved back. And I couldn't say exactly why, but he kind of looked up at me, and I looked up at him, and he asked, "Hey, do I know you, man? Did you do time where I did time?" And I told him, "There's just no way. I'm sorry, man. We didn't do time at the same place." And he went, "Oh, all right, never mind then." And he thought a couple seconds, went, "Hey, what about High Desert, though?" And I looked up, and I didn't realize he meant in Nevada. I thought he meant California's High Desert. And I went, "You're kidding me." And we talked for about 2 minutes about High Desert Prison and how gnarly it was before we realized we were talking about different prisons. I was talking about the one in California, and he was talking about the one in Nevada. Interestingly, there was a warden who served at San Quentin, and I can't remember the guy's name offhand, but at San Quentin, he pioneered some of the lethal force policies, which were turned down in the 90s here in California. But under this warden's rule, not just at San Quentin, but the policies that he helped pioneer up until the 90s when they were in effect, it was live ammo, shots fired all the time. Inmates were getting killed. The court eventually shut it down. They said you can't reasonably argue that you're going to use live ammo and shoot two different dudes in the chest to break up a fist fight. There's no preservation of life. You're not protecting the scene or anything like it. All you're doing is just killing people for the fact of killing them. I'm being a little bit facetious. This, of course, is not a direct quote of the court's decision, but they quit firing guns so much in California. Right around this time, that warden went to Nevada. He transferred to High Desert State Prison in Nevada and pioneered a nice brand new reign of live fire guns in which more inmates were killed. He was a trigger happy guy. I have to do a video on him on some point. It was an interesting little piece of CDCR history, or I suppose penological history in general. Warden Sumner. Thank you, Celeste Girl. Way to have that correctional history right in the back of your head. Warden Sumner was the gentleman's name. He started at San Quentin and then went to High Desert State Prison in Nevada. I never heard High Desert called the White House, but I absolutely believe it. I will tell you that that was a terrible prison to be for anybody, but it was doubly a bad prison to be if you were the wrong color. It's awful to have to express something in that manner, but that was one racist prison. Explicitly and without apology, they would say to you something like, well, I don't like that guy because he's... And then go ahead and insert whatever offensive ethnic slur you can think of. Whenever I say they, I don't mean the guys in the gang. I don't mean the shot caller or my cellie. I mean the cops. I mean the correctional officers, the peace officers who were receiving a wage from the state out of citizens' tax dollars were overtly and unapologetically racist. It was an offense that I cannot express in a manner that people will understand how okay it was to talk about things like the Ku Klux Klan, the Aryan Brotherhood, being the right color amongst correctional professionals, and they were okay with it. It was absurd. I may have went on a bit of a tangent. For all I know, it's called the White House because the president of some gang is there, but that was my recollection of High Desert. Whenever I arrived there in 2002, and this is just one of those incredible coincidences that makes life interesting, there was somebody else who has since paroled and has succeeded doing videos on YouTube, a gentleman named Uso Ron. He has a YouTube channel called 30 to Life. I just did a interview with him speaking about our shared experiences at High Desert and just whatever else came up. It was a heck of a lot of fun to get to talk to him. And man, what an interesting coincidence that not only were he and I together at High Desert, but then that very same building, High Desert B3, a couple of years later, I was with a dude who's still known too. That's a Powder from Stories Written by a Current Prisoner. I suppose that CDCR produced a couple of guys that felt the need to tell their stories on YouTube for whatever reason. For myself, I'm less interested in the we're all tough, scary inmates, and you get hard in prison, and, with the tattoos and the yelling and the ego. I just want to draw light to some of the absurdities that I saw that, frankly, I know are still going on. This is a closed system where they get away with atrocities that shouldn't happen in a first world country. And I don't mean to maximize these, blow things out of proportion. Let's be clear. The atrocities that happened in California prison, the awful things that I endured, they don't hold a candle to what I would have experienced in a real bad prison, especially in a real bad country. You want to know what prison's like? Go to Guatemala and commit a crime or something like that. That said, human rights abuses are never okay. It's never okay for the people in authority to abuse that authority, especially solely for sadistic and venial gain. Josh Robinson noticed that he also heard it was called the White House. I'm going to have to ask Scooby if he knows why High Desert was called the White House. I'm still corresponding with a couple of gentlemen. I'm still corresponding with several gentlemen who are incarcerated, and maybe I can get an answer on that. The interview that I did with Uso Ron was particularly interesting in that we had a shared experience with a nasty cop. And I don't mean a dirty cop as in he was bringing in drugs and selling them, though he might have been. What the hell do I know? I mean a nasty, dirty cop in that he was a petty sadist. He enjoyed hurting people, you could tell. And this cop had assaulted both Ron and I in the very same manner. What he would do is he would search you. And you understand, if you're being searched, you start by putting your arms out so that they can, pat you down and make sure you don't have anything on you. However, if they are concerned you may be a security threat, for instance, that you might have a knife and you're going to do something, well, then rather than have you put your arms out, because then whenever they went down to check your waist, you could assault them, they'll have you stand about 4 feet away from a wall and lean forward. Put your hands against the wall like this, maybe a little further out, and then lean so that you don't have a good sense of balance. And they'll take your feet and they'll kick them a little further apart, kick them a little back, so that you're just barely there. You can't take one hand off the wall and move quickly. You have to move very slowly and carefully. It creates a situation in which you're about to fall so that they can safely search you without being worried that you might move aggressively while they're distracted. He would do this, and then come up behind you when you couldn't see and against your genitals from behind, make you fall over. And then when you fell, would start yelling at you as if you had done an aggressive maneuver, get up, get back against the wall. It's something he did occasionally, and he was known for it. And he did it to both of us. And it was a funny thing that he went, "Hey, do you remember Officer such and such?" I called him Hooper in the videos that I shot because I didn't want to use his real name. And Ron just bleeped the guy's name out whenever we were talking. But we had the same experience with this same nasty little sadist who had his way of, proving to inmates that he was bigger than they are. And it's something that I've said in a lot of ways, that prison should not be a fun place. It's not a good place. Whenever I complain that, prison was hard, I didn't like it, I don't want to go back, I think that some people hear me playing the world's smallest violin for those poor murderers and drug addicts and rapists. It's not fair that prison's bad. It should be all ice cream and sunshine. Prison should be bad, but it should not be bad in an unregulated and uncontrolled way. The idea that the correct way to rehabilitate inmates, to prove them the error of their ways, is to lock them in a cage where the only interaction they have is with sadists like Hooper who will beat them for the fun of it. I suppose you can make people afraid of prison and angry about it. I have never believed and I refuse to believe that it actually rehabilitates men, though. All that type of suffering does is make them angry at the world. That's just my 2 cents. What the heck do I know? I spent most of my life locked in a cage. Big J Prophet asks how I'm doing. And man, I love answering that question, because since I got out, every day is a gift. And the days in there, they were good too. Don't get me wrong. I loved them. Some of them, I guess. But since I got out, do you know what I'm going to do after this? I have a New York steak in the fridge, and I'm going to cook it up for myself and my wife and my 2 beautiful boys who love to, get a little bit of steak. Who doesn't? And then I'm going to clean my house, and I'm going to trim some of the stuff off of my cat because she needs to have her hair cut. But Mostly, I'm just going to live a decent suburban life. And I am blessed and gifted for getting to do that. I always say in these videos, don't take things for granted. Come on, don't take them for granted. I caught myself. I ran out of hot water whenever I was trying to get cleaned up earlier. And so I had to take a little bit of a cold shower. And I was grumbling, oh, a cold shower, this is the end of the world, I hate it. It's, and, you know, you jump in, you go, oh, and you're trying to get done quick, and then you get out, and you're thinking, oh, it's so bad, I gotta get dried off, and I caught myself in the middle of this, and I remembered the video that I did, where I talked about Ivan making fun of people. Oh, you have no hot water, grow up. It's not that bad. You want bad, you be hungry for a couple of days. Not a couple hours, a couple of days. That's what he'd tell you. Then you know bad. I caught myself and I just laughed. That was, I don't know, 2-3 hours ago, and I have been smiling since because I am so lucky. And I get to talk about my experiences here to this camera about anybody who will listen. Thank you for listening. Celeste Girl asks if High Desert was more racist than other prisons. It's difficult for me to answer. The thing is that CDC intentionally separates prisons by demographics, by race. Some prisons have more of this ethnicity than others. In Central California, prisons are largely Hispanic. In Southern California, they're largely African American, and in Northern California, they're largely white. This is way general, of course. You need to look at each prison, and they actually keep demographics where they keep track of, to a very specific percentage, what ethnicity is comprised of the inmate population. High Desert was a white prison. I believe it was about 50% white, maybe just a little bit more even, like 55. It could have been as little as 40, but this is a very big number whenever you consider that the demographics are divided amongst two different types of Hispanics, blacks, whites, others. It's a big percentage. It's the plurality by far, if not the majority. And since that's the ethnicity that I am, it's possible that just the officers felt more comfortable talking about this stuff in front of me. They assumed that I felt the same way they did. It could just be that the other prisons that I was at, they were quieter about it around me and more open about it around other people. That said, from my personal experience, what I saw, oh yeah, High Desert was brutally racist. I've talked before about whenever I entered protective custody, I just kind of stuck my neck out there, my nose out there, and got involved in somebody else's business. And my essential concern was the lives of a pair of African-American gentlemen that I was acquainted with. I don't mean we were friends, but I knew them. And the, I believe it was a lieutenant, whoever it was, the guy who came to ask me what the heck I was doing getting involved, the officer, he used an ethnic slur that I'm not going to use, but he used it in regards to the pair of African-American gentlemen. He asked, what do you care if a pair of, use this word, get killed on my yard? He was the authority figure, not just in the room, not just speaking to me, the inmate, but he was the authority figure on the yard at that time. He's in charge of 1,000 inmates and 40 officers and felt comfortable using that word with an open door, nice and loud, to an inmate. I'm not surprised he felt comfortable about it. If somebody had said, hey, boss, don't say that word, it's offensive, that would have surprised me. That would have shocked me. My jaw would have hit the floor, and I didn't have the pair of balls to say that to him. He can use any word he wants. He's in charge. So yeah, definitely more racist than others. I'm going to go ahead and check out the comments for a second. Big J Prophet asks, what gang ran the prison? And that's a difficult question to answer. The yard that I was on, B Yard, it was not an Aryan Brotherhood yard for the whites. There is a percentage of yards in CDC in which the Aryan Brotherhood is not in charge. And this is just because the people that don't get along with the Aryan Brotherhood for whatever reason, they need some place to go, so there's going to be a percentage of yards that they divide for them. The administration actually does this with every gang. It doesn't matter what gang it is. There are some yards that they try to keep that gang off of. Otherwise, you'd have constant gang wars. You need to have some place to send people whenever the gangs are warring. As a result, at least amongst the whites, the Caucasians, there was not as much structure as you see at most prisons. To say who ran the yard is a little difficult. We had a MAC rep and we had a shot caller, but it was more of a consensus amongst the woods in general. Of course, one can argue that the gang that actually ran the prison was that green line, you know, the green wall, correctional officers. Because I'll tell you that without a doubt, under the definition of the RICO statutes, under the definition of a criminal gang, yeah, absolutely, a number of correctional officers were involved in an actual criminal gang that dealt drugs and killed people, and it is what it is. But they ran the prison, you better believe it. And if you stepped out of line, if you got yourself too far out there, I have no doubt that there are a couple of corpses buried in that yard somewhere, or there's a couple of guys that got set up with nice long life sentences for saying and doing the wrong thing. That is the reality of doing time in CDC, is that you don't have the power to protect yourself. And I don't just mean protect yourself like you don't get beaten up. I don't mean even that your cellie doesn't hurt you bad. I mean that if you say the wrong thing offhandedly, you're having a bad day, and you say, you know what, man, heck with you and everything you're about, to the wrong officer on his bad day too, that little mistake, sentence of life without parole or something ridiculous like that. He goes into your cell, he finds a little pinner joint or little thing of meth or whatever it is he had set aside for just this occasion. You have no recourse. You're going to go to court, you're going to get found guilty, and you're going to do a rip of time. You might die in prison. And it happens very rarely, but that level of power, that one-sided power dynamic, especially whenever you see that these people are corrupt, evil, dirty, they're racists, it makes it very difficult to look at anything else through an untinted lens, as it were. Everything that they're about is corrupted. You can't trust them for anything. Matthew Alverico notes that he enjoyed the interview that was done on 30 to Life, which I'm glad to hear. I had been a little nervous, honestly, because speaking for an hour and a half straight is a long time. I usually schedule these live streams for about 30 minutes. I feel like that's about as much interesting as I have to say, but in the interview format, where Uso and I were speaking at length, well, it was a lot of fun, actually, to be able to talk about some of this stuff. I don't see too much interesting in the comments that I want to get to right now. And this has been approximately a half hour. So I'm going to start wrapping up my live stream, and I want to sincerely thank everybody for listening, because this is just the best thing for me to get to do. And I didn't get to do my live stream yesterday because I was traveling. You'll note that I now have my nice blue wall behind me and I'm back in my home. And I really missed it. Thank you for listening today. And I hope to continue the story of the professor sometime soon. But my next video that I'm going to shoot, I think, is going to be about my experiences immediately after I left the line at High Desert whenever I went SNY. It was a pretty difficult time, and there were a lot of real interesting things that happened that I think might give insight into the prison experience, as it were. So I'm going to close here, and one final time. Thank you for listening today.